What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and welcome to year two of the $1 Million Game. We're going to be doing a bunch of hand breakdowns. I'm going to talk a little bit in between hands as well. I want to talk about just some dynamic stuff and maybe a few of my general thoughts. But we're going to be doing a breakdown each day. I will be bringing to you right here on this channel a review of the largest pots and some of the most interesting pots and my general thoughts. I think as a player in the game, it adds a little bit more context and some insight into what's happening that I think maybe you're not going to get in on a lot of the other content out there unless there are people making videos that I would not expect. I am looking forward to Texas Mike's YouTube channel. I think that could be some really good stuff. Anyway, so we're going to look at a bunch of hands from today, but before we do, I want to announce that we have a $25 off our new upswing trainer, Lucid GTO. Head on over now to upswingpoker.com for a $25 discount using code DON'TPUNT, because when the stakes matter the most, you don't want to be making your biggest blunders.
I'm going to do something real punty here out of the gate, guys.
Doug makes the call.
This is a GTO call. That's on.
Well, man.
Polk shoots it all in there.
Fold.
Show him.
Fuck! Fuck!
Ah, thank you, Thomas, for those examples of huge punts. Wouldn't want to be that guy. If you want to learn more, I'll put a link in the description below so you can check it out. All right, let's move on and get into the game. So before we get going, I want to talk about the dynamic of the game. I think it's a little important to note. So I felt like overall this was a great lineup, and there were a lot of very interesting hands, and I think this was well put together. I think I kind of contrast that with day one last time around, where people were just playing a lot more scared. That was not the case here. We played a few pots that were over $1 million. We had some big bluffs. We had some loose pre-flop play. We had all kinds of stuff. And I think some players really rose to the occasion, particularly Texas Mike. I think went above and beyond the Call of Duty. Maybe just way far beyond the Call of Duty. Someone tell him to go back to duty. But anyway, we had a lot of good hands, a lot of cool stuff. But I just wanted to make one note. I do think that the table, and maybe this is just me as a talkative player, I felt like it was a little tense and quiet for good portions of the time. Legitimately, no one was talking. It reminded me a bit of tournament poker, like when you watch like a final table, no one's saying anything. I don't find that enjoying. It feels tense to me, and it creates a dynamic where it's not like people really going for it and having a good time. I like poker more like that. I guess each their own. So let me know in the comments, what do you think? Do you think that, do you like a chattier game? Do you like a quiet game? Was this perfect? Was this too quiet? Let me know your thoughts. First hand I want to discuss is the hand where Peter had 10s and Tom Dwan had 9-4 suited. But just to kind of run through the action, so Peter opens under the gun to 4,000. Standard play with 10s. Steve looks down ace-jack of diamonds in the cutoff. As you get deeper, and this is something that I think a lot of people seem to not understand about Deep Stack No Limit. Like, these guys are hundreds or maybe even thousands of blinds deep. You should definitely be tricky with good hands. So I see some players like, oh my god, what a nit, didn't 3-bet jacks. It's like, well, yes, when you're 1,000 blinds deep, jacks is not going to be like pure 3-bet every time, man. You need to sometimes have it when you call, or else you're kind of easy to play against. So next time you see a player call queens pre-flop, it can be good, and it doesn't mean that they're scared money and they're just like, oh my god, I have to pot control. They're trying to play good poker, and so it's totally fine to be calling me out. Now, ace jack of diamonds, not pocket queens, but the point remains, I think for Steve, both options totally fine. Dwan gets in here on the button with 9-4 of hearts, and this kind of strikes me as there was a famous online poker player named Scout325, I think it was, something like that. But basically, back in the Poker Stars, this guy was this Russian, very rich Russian guy, and he would log in and lose like $20,000, $30,000 every single day, no matter what. And the funniest thing about the Scout game was the dynamic that happened was when people would see him, they would just go apeshit banana sandwich because they're like, I got to get this 30K. Flatting the button with 9-4 suited feels like that to me from Tom. Now, that's not to say I don't know Peter. It seems to me like he's one of those players where he has a lot of action and he plays some really big pots. I don't know. But when I see someone flatting 9-4 suited, I know we had the button, but when I see 9-4 suited getting flatted versus an under-the-gun raise, you just have to be overrealizing so massively post-flop. And there are so many bad things that can happen to you. I don't think I really have to explain to you guys why I think 9-4 suited is not a 4 big blind call on the button. versus under the gun open. Anyway, moving on. So Tom decides to call here with the 9-4 suited. Hook now calls in the big blind with 7-5. Pretty close spot here pre-flop, I think, with 7-5. Usually you will defend these kinds of things to smaller raises, but 4 big blinds is kind of big. I would imagine in theory it's probably a fold, but whatever. Okay, 18.5K. We take a flop, 6-4-4. And this is an action flop, guys. We got something for everyone. We've got an open ender for Hook, overpair for Peter currently. Pretty good flop for tens, and then Steve with a nut flush draw, and Tom Dwan flops trips. So really, all kinds of ways this hand can go from here, based on what happens. Hook checks. Peter decides to bet. Peter goes for about half pot, probably a little bit big here, but fine. Obviously, no one's going to have a 4 that often, so certainly a spot that you're going to be doing a lot of betting with tens. Now it gets kind of interesting, right? Because Steve goes next here, and I don't really mind call or raise from Steve. I probably prefer call by a bit. Generally speaking, when you have draws and the pot gets huge on paired boards, you're dead at least a chunk of the time. Trying to minimize that makes sense to me. That said, your hand is quite strong. You have the nut flush draw. It's very unlikely that there are boats, at least so far. Really, it's just pocket sixes that you'd be concerned about. Maybe 6-4 off from Hook. But realistically, your draw is very clean right now. So I would say that I wouldn't mind mixing in a raise every now and then. That said, Peter bet half pot and he bet into 3 players. So I think call is probably the preferred decision. And Steve eventually agrees and goes for it. Quick note, Steve was just great today. He was just so upbeat, and some of the Steve moments were just so low key funny, and he's just like always kind of doing a bit. I thought he was a great addition to the game, in terms of just dynamic with a lot of like kind of more intense players. But anyway, Steve makes the call. Now to Tom with a 4. Very interesting here with the 4, because on one hand, if you start to raise and barrel, you're gonna blow a lot of hands out of the water that you have in bad shape. But there are a bunch of draws that can call, and there are in theory some worse 4s that can call. But mainly you're trying to get value from those overpairs of Peter, and that's really what this hand kind of drives back to. Is Peter is likely to have an overpair here when he bets into 4 people for the size. So I just don't mind either way from Tom. I think call and raise both totally fine. I don't mind the idea of raising now to try and start building this pot and kind of knocking out the equity of some other players. I don't mind a call either. I think that they're both totally fine options, and he ultimately does decide to go for the raise. Again, makes sense to me. Now Hook has an easy decision here with the open ender to get out of the way. Back to Peter. This is a pretty healthy raise, 4.5x size raise. With the overpair for Peter, I think you're going to have to call at least 1. I think the more interesting question is what does Steve want to do here, considering you could be dead occasionally, but I think he has to call as well. So both players call, and we take a turn. The turn is the money card, the offsuit 10. Now, well, I guess the suited 10 might have been more of a money card for Steve, but regardless, Peter now top boat. Everyone checks to Tom. I think you pretty clearly got to keep betting here in Tom's shoes. Plenty of hands that will call you. Peter's definitely going to have jacks through aces in his range as well. Either player can have diamonds, 10x of diamonds. And then even in theory, there's a few worse 4s that Peter could potentially have, right? Like 5-4, 4-3, 7-4 suited, all those kinds of things. Not impossible, but mainly Peter has overpairs, and so you got to get value. I think anything other than a bet here would be a pretty big mistake. As far as size goes, I think this is a pretty reasonable size. I might go a little bit bigger. One of the things that I don't like about this bet here from Tom, I think he wants to set himself up to be able to jam the river. So, you're looking at like 120-ish K in the pot on this turn, and you bet 76. If you go like 120, you go like full pot, maybe even a little over bet, you can maybe go for the whole enchilada. And it's hard for me to imagine Peter's getting away from that. But certainly not bad to go for more of a 2/3 pot size and play 2/3, 2/3, or 2/3 then overbet, whatever. I don't know. Just some thoughts from Doug. Okay. Anyway, Peter, now he's in the dream spot. He's got the top boat. What do you want to do here? I think it's a pretty clear just call anything you want to continue, right? Because Tom raises the flop, barrels this turn big. Tom is now officially saying I've got a four, right? Or a bluff, but I don't have like nines. I don't have like jacks. I guess maybe jacks, but pretty unlikely. Tom is basically saying with this turn bet, I'm either bluffing you or I have a four. And when players are very polarized, typically speaking, you want to respond by just calling your range. Because if you raise, you knock out the bluffs, which is bad if you have a good hand. And you also would want to give them a chance to bluff the river. And if they have a good hand, they're going to bet again anyway. So Peter does decide to call, and let's take the river. River comes the deuce of hearts, and Peter checks. Now in the situation, a pretty clear spot for Tom to be betting. I don't mind anything that's in the 2/3 pot to full pot type range. You could argue that the bet should be more like 200K here or 180K, but 167 also totally fine, maybe just a little bit small. When you're repping polar, you typically don't like these smaller sizes on the river, but again, maybe just a bit smaller than I'd like to see. No matter how you dice it, it's definitely a bet, and Peter super likely to have these overpair hands when he calls turn. So now over to Peter. I think Peter just has to jam. I know he went for the small raise here, where chips just kind of kept coming out into the pot, and I love this last chip he just tacks on top. I think that was a great one too. Just a little 25K for the road. I think you either want to jam. You should not have a small check raise size here. It should just be all in. But regardless, obviously you're going to raise. And the question now back to Tom. This is just a brutal situation, man. What do you do? I don't have good answers, guys. I don't have good answers. So, you're going to have a few bluffs here. The kind of most sensible bluffs would be a hand like 7-5 of, clubs or hearts or those two are nice because you block a couple of fours, you unblock the flush draw. Stuff like that would be your most natural bluff. Maybe you could have a hand like threes that you raised and ran it with if you're going to pick out bluffs. What would Peter bluff with? I think in theory he's probably supposed to turn a hand that's 10x of diamonds into a bluff, right? So I would definitely not want to have a 10 here in Tom's shoes, but he's not going to have one anyway, so it doesn't really matter all that much. I don't think that there's too many concerns about removal here other than Tom has to look at all the hands he has and think to myself, where am I at in terms of my value? And I think he can fold. He's got ace-4 suited for sure, king-4 suited for sure. There's a chance Peter also has a 4, but a stronger 4. And then he'll also, of course, have pocket 6s, pocket 4s, pocket 10s. I think he's just got enough hands here to let this one go. But I can understand the logic. You're not going to have too many strong hands here. You can have some worse 4s as well. You don't have a diamond. Those things are all good, but I think this one is maybe just a touch too stationary from Tom. There are plenty of big, interesting hands to choose from, but I'm going to stick to the pots that are around $1 million in size or more, which brings us to our next hand where I believe it's straddled up to 2,000, and Tom opens up Queen 10 off in the cutoff. Hook calls the button with Jack 8. It's a standard open. It's a bit too loose on the button from Hook. I think maybe just a notch better. Jack 9, certainly Jack 10 going to be hand 2 on a play, but just a little bit too loose. Down to Peter in the small blind, pocket 7s. For just a 3x open, I think you probably want to just 3-bet your range. You do decide to play here, but obviously could be fine to play some calls. Sevens makes a lot of sense as a call if you're going to be playing it there. And then Action Dan looks down at pocket kings here in the straddle. It makes it $55,000 to go. This is a very big size 3-bet, I think. Yes, it is. It's about 9x the open. Usually you'd want to go about 5x if there was no calls here, maybe 7x with 2 callers. 9x is a very big 3-bet. Maybe he just thinks that Peter, obviously a bit of a loose player and is currently up $500,000. Maybe he thinks that Peter's just going to call. I don't know. But anyway, Peter does decide to call, and we take a flop. Flops Jack 7-4, as I like to call it, the bad news for Action Dan. He flops an overpair here. And unfortunately for him, he is now up against a set against a player with a ton of money and is super loose and has been playing a lot of hands. So this is just going to be very, very, very expensive. And frankly, could just result in you getting stacked. Now, this is where the hand is actually kind of the most interesting street, almost in my mind. Peter checks the flop. You're going to want to bet 1/3 pot quite often on this board. It's a fairly dry board. I know there's some draws out there, but typically speaking, the kinds of hands that make draws aren't going to call this big of a 3-bet. So while there are a few hands that maybe could be hands like hearts or 10-9 suited, typically speaking, not all too many draws on this spot where you feel like you really need to be charging those kinds of hands. But what's interesting to me about kings here for action Dan, he does have a heart and a diamond. This hand will still bet the flop more than check, I think. But what's interesting about kings with a heart and a diamond, you actually block a lot of the hands that you'd want to call, right? Like if Peter had a hand like king, queen of hearts or diamonds, he might consider calling the flop. You block both of those. Same thing with, he can't have king, jack of diamonds. He's less likely to have king, jack. He's less likely to have king, 10 of hearts, king, 9 of hearts, something like that if you played a little bit loose preflop. So of all of the times you have kings here, this kings actually does make the most sense to me to check back. I'd still mainly bet, but Dan does decide to check it back, and let's take a turn. Turn comes the jack of clubs, pairing the board. Once again, Peter checks now. Very, very sneaky check from Peter. I think typically you want to just be betting here. I don't mind it checking, right? Because you let your opponent try and value bet thin, and it protects your weaker hands that want to check. So can't really go wrong either way. But typically speaking, when you have good hands and the flop goes check, check, usually out of position you want to be mainly betting and trying to build the pot. I think I'd like to see, I don't mind a 40k bet, an 80k bet, both seem reasonable to me, but I'd probably prefer to start betting. But again, don't mind check, and you should certainly be doing it some of the time as well. Over to Dan now with kings. He got to start betting at this point. You faced 2 straight checks. This is actually like a relatively safe turn, right? Because even though it's possible Peter has a jack's probably mainly betting, and there's only 2 jacks left in the deck. So I'd rather see a jack than, like the 9 of hearts or something. Actually, in that case, I have a flush draw, so maybe that's not true. Point remains that this is a fairly bricky turn, and it's time to start betting some value. I'd probably like to see about a 2/3 pot bet here. 80, 82k, 85k, 90k, all seems pretty reasonable in my mind, and ultimately he does decide to go for 82k. So 2/3 pot bet here from Dan over to Peter with 7s, and now we actually have an Academy Award for best performance, which goes to Peter here before making this raise. You can see the pain in his eyes as he ends up making this raise here on the turn. Some absolute great Hollywood happening here in Los Angeles. So anyway, back to Dan. It's a very small raise. Peter should be going a bit bigger, I think, here than 180. This is like a little over a min raise, so there's a lot of value to be had in Peter's shoes here. I would like to see him go more like 250, 300, and look to really just put the pressure on. But he does decide to go for 180. Really nothing Dan can do here. He's going to have bluffs on the turn. Those fold. And then of all of his value bets, kings is just about as good as it gets. He has a few jacks, but when the raise is this small, he has to call, and he's going to be dead unless this river is a king. Let's take a river. Close, but no cigar. This is a queen on the river. Peter now going to win this one. He has the check mark. 500,000 in the middle. I think it's time for a pretty big bet here in Peter's shoes. I'd like to see something along the line of, maybe more like 300, 350, 400, 500. Your repping trips are better at this point, and it's pretty clear that Dan has something like a 1-pair type hand. So he ultimately goes half pot. Guys, like, I just can't see how you get away from this in Dan's shoes. I know when you see all the cards, it looks really easy. The dude has a boat. But this is a check flop line. You bet 2/3 turn, you get almost min raise, and then he gets half pot river. If you're folding kings to this, I mean, Dan can have 10s, 9s, 8s. Um, some heart hands, a check back bet turn. It's not impossible that he river to queen here with some kind of heart hand. Kings is just such a strong hand. Now maybe you could argue that you'd rather have kings with a spade, right? Because then you block some more jack X hands like king jack of spades, and maybe you don't want to have the heart because the heart makes it so he's less likely to have some kind of flush draw bluff. But again, I just think you're just way too high up, and these sizes are just way too small. So this is going to be $1 million pot, and it's not going to Dan, but it's really hard to fault the guy for the decision he made. Next hand's going to go down as one of the all-time great stream hands. I don't know where it's going to rank, but just the magnitude of this bluff and how totally unnecessary it was with no regard for human life. And a shout out to Doyle Brunson essentially as well. I mean, this is just an all-time stream classic. So this hand begins, hook opens it up under the gun with 8-7 of clubs. Hands calls in the cutoff here, 10-9 suited. These are both definitely standard plays. Hands could 3-bet. No issues from me either way. Action folds over to Texas Mike, who looks down at the 10 deuce, which is just a complete pure fold pre-flop. So he does call. And let's take a flop. Ace 5-4 rainbow. Hook now decides to bet the flop for 5,000. Definitely a hand that likes to bet. This board does not have that much betting, and when you do bet, you tend to bet pretty small. 5K, certainly fitting the bill there. And this hand, probably one of your favorite bluff hands to be betting with the gutter to the nuts. Texas Mike now, 10 deuce. I would argue just to fold. You've got a bad gutter where it's one card and also it makes a higher straight with 7-6. So I would just fold, but it is cheap, so I don't hate the idea of check calling, which he does decide to do. And let's take a turn. Turn comes the 6, the money card now for Hook. He hits the nuts on the turn, and Mike now decides to get pretty feisty. Hook bets 16,000, and Mike decides to check raise to 52,000 here with just the 10 deuce. He does have a spade. I don't think that matters. I mean, this is just an absolute pure fold on the turn. I can't even think of a worse hand you can have. I mean, can you? Yeah, let me know in the comments. Can you think of a worse hand that Texas Mike can have here? Because I can't. Anyway, he ultimately does decide to check raise 52,000. Question now for Hook, how does he want to play this? I think when you start to get really deep, and you get into weird lines, I do think that playing your whole range at a call makes a lot of sense here. So I think I'd probably only call. You could maybe argue that Hook should bet 3-bet here sometimes with hands like 8-7 and then a few bluffs, something like 9-7 suited or maybe 9-8 of spades. A very select few hands that bet 3-bet, but I prefer keeping my range together and playing it all at a call here facing this pretty polarized turn raise. Texas Mike repping, a few hands like ace-6, ace-5. We've seen him do that in the stream earlier. And then, of course, all the straights. So plenty of hands that Mike can have here for value. But I do think I would just elect to call, which Hook ultimately does decide to do. So we take a river, 140K in there. And the ace of hearts rolls off. Now, the board paired, so of course the nuts has changed from a straight over to a boat. Now, Texas Mike checks. This is just a weird situation, right? Because Mike's main value bets on the turn are probably 8-7, 7-3 suited. I'm going to go ahead and say 7-3 off, given he had 10 deuce off. And maybe 3 deuce that trap the flop, with a little bit of hands like pocket sixes makes a lot of sense, and some ace-6. So there's going to be some boats for Texas Mike here. Hook can also have a good chunk of boats. Definitely possible for Hook to have pocket sixes, pocket fives, pocket fours, pocket aces, ace-6 suited, ace-5 suited, ace-4 suited. Basically every ace, all totally possible. Hook can also have some hands like ace-king, ace-queen. I would expect those to be checking the flop occasionally and the turn a decent amount and sometimes folding to the check raise. So I would not anticipate Hook having an ace all too often. If I'm Hook and I bet here, I feel like I need to be able to beat some straights, or else there's not really much reason to bet. right? Because if Mike has ace-6, 6-6, he's going to have a boat. And if he has a hand like 8-7, 7-3, he's going to pay off 3-deuce as well, but just a little bit less likely because he didn't check raise the flop. So in my mind, I think 8-7's around the worst I would go for value in hook shoes. I think I would need at least around this hand. And I'd be going pretty big for value because I'm quite polar. I like about a pot size bet here. 140K looks pretty good to me. So definitely got a bet here with his hand. And Hook goes for a little bit of an overbet actually. Seems fine too. He goes for 160,000. And Texas Mike makes one of the most ambitious bluffs of all time, maybe number one of all time, and just rips it in here. I mean, we just gotta just stop for a second and appreciate the pure size of this man's balls to take 10 deuce off, defend legitimately every street with nothing but a bad one card gutter, and then check jam versus one of the stationiest players at the table, and to do so versus an under the gun raise. I mean, mother of God. Hook can have pretty much every single boat here, and you've got not even one blocker to anything. You've got the reverse unblockers, whatever the hell the kids are calling them these days. I mean, mother of God, this bluff. I mean, this is in its own category. Like, I've seen some big bluffs. Obviously, I got bluff last time on the show. That one was pretty ballsy as well. But at least there I could have a lot of one pairs. Here, you're bluff check jamming into a guy that called your turn check raise on a board pairing river. I mean, what the fuck is that? I don't even know. I mean, frankly, this is maybe the most Texas thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I mean, honestly, what are we even doing here? Okay, I almost have to compose myself with how ridiculous this is. Anyway, so needless to say, from a purely theoretical standpoint, I don't got to get the charts out. I can tell you pretty confidently that the solver does not approve of this, but the community definitely does, with this being one of the most enjoyed hands I can ever remember, and it is nice to have that shout out to Doyle Brunson. May he rest in peace. Okay, back over to Hook. I mean, you just got the worst of the bad news. I mean, this is just a horrible place to be. But the reality is for Hook, he can have a lot of boats. How is Hook going to play pocket fives here? The same way. Pocket fours, the same way. Pocket sixes could check the flop a good amount, but if it does bet the flop, it's going to be the same way. Ace 5 suited, it's going to be the same way. Ace 4 suited, also the same. Ace 6 I would expect to be checking the flop a good amount, but if you do bet, it's going to end up being the same way. So you've got just about your worst value bet, and you have every boat here. You just got to fold. I don't actually even think it's that close. You have a few bluffs, 9-7 suited here, some spade hands that bet turn got check raised. You got a few bluffs in here. It might make sense to bluff with a hand like 5-4 suited. Could make sense on this depth. I could go either way on that. But the point is, you have some bluffs, those fold, and now we have to fold some value. And straights are just not good enough for this. I know Mike's repping ace 6 and sixes, not a lot of hands, but you just need to have something better than this to call. So tough spot. Sometimes you get put in the blender and it pans out. But my God, this bluff from Mike. I can't even say words. I've never seen anything like this. This is real money, everybody. We are playing for real money. All right, let's move on. Moving on to another Texas Mike hand. This time we're going the opposite way. Action Dan opens it up. 4K straddle here. Opens 7-6 of diamonds up to $10,000. Texas Mike looks down. King Queen suited in the cutoff. He 3-bets 33,000. Certainly could do some calling as well. 3-betting also good. And Dan makes the call. We're taking a heads up flop here. 70K out there in the middle. Jack 9-8, 2 spades. Bit of an interesting board here. Obviously, Texas Mike with a huge hand. Gutter to the nuts. Flush draw here to the second nut flush. 2 overs. Massive hand. But Action Dan actually does have a pretty good chunk of equity where against a lot of hands where he has the the straight to the bad end on the 10, the straight to a fairly strong straight on a 5, and also backdoor diamonds. So it's not a great draw, but it's not a terrible one either. We should see some fireworks. And Texas Mike does decide to go ahead and bet here on the flop. and he goes for a size of 49,000, just about 2/3 pot. Seems reasonable. Over to Dan. I don't actually hate any option here. It's a classic poker hand situation. The reason I don't mind check raising is if he does end up 3-betting you, I don't hate just check raise folding. So it doesn't seem like a disaster to do that. Whereas if I had a hand like King 10 suited, I'd feel much worse about that. Or spades, particularly spades that are not good enough to go with. But for example, if I check raised here with a hand like Ace Queen of Spades, I'd be okay with it because I can pretty much go versus any action. But if I somehow had like Ace Deuce of Spades, I would feel a lot less good about it. Regardless, 7-6, I don't mind the raise idea, looking to barrel a lot of runouts. I don't mind a call idea, looking to hit a straight or bluff if it goes check check turn. I do hate folding, so I don't think that's reasonable. But anyway, moving on. Ultimately, Dan does decide to call. We take a turn, 170,000 out there, and an action turn card, the King of Diamonds. Both players' hands heating up. Everyone's getting excited about this board. Yet the action cools down here as Texas Mike turns top pair and he checks it back. I think this is actually a really intelligent check from Texas Mike. You pot control. You have a nice, easy one-street hand for value if you don't improve. You can call bluffs, no problem. And if you do improve, you're going to be able to bet or raise the river. So you put yourself in a good spot anyway. Really don't mind this at all. And the river is the straight flush. That, my friends, is a straight flush in a $1 million game. You don't see that every day. Now for Dan, I don't really like this situation that much for him, given that a queen makes a straight and there are plenty of queens out there. I think that you either need to go for 1/3 pot or check. Flush also gets in. I lean towards just check here. If you do bet, you're going to get action from a queen or a flush, I think. And I don't think that Texas Mike has a set because sets are going to barrel the turn. So if he does have a set, he's got like pocket tens, king 10. I just think you got to check here on the river. I don't really like anything other than check. And it gives you some straights that can check call in this spot too. I don't hate 1/3 pot, but I do prefer check. Anyway, Dan decided to fire pretty big here. He actually goes for a full-size pot bet. And Texas Mike gives him the business with the straight flush. This guy is playing some poker, taking to the streets. Our new hero, Texas Mike. Our next big hand is not played deep in the heart with the action folding a Tom Dwan. The cutoff opens up Jack 10, certainly standard now. Hooking the small blind makes it 20K to go. I think this is a little bit too big. It's not the end of the world. I think I'd prefer more like a $12,000 to $15,000 size. But again, do not hate going this big, out of position trying to knock people out. Peter down the big blind, Queen 10 suited. I think you're supposed to mainly fold this. As you get deeper, you could mix in some flats, but I think you mainly fold a little bit of 4-bet. But again, this man's up $1 million, gets to do what he wants, and he does decide to call here in position. Call gets better as you get deeper, though, as well, for the record. And then Tom decides to call with Jack 10 off. Really not a fan of this. This hand's just too weak. It has some shades of 9-4 suited from earlier, where I think he's trying to play pots with Peter. But again, at some point, hand strength has to matter. And we look at our hands here, right? Like Peter is actually just getting great value from Tom here with his hand versus Tom's hand. That said, Hook's of course getting the best value, and that 20K 3-bet looking pretty smart right now. Anyway, we take a flop. Ace 10-6, everyone's got something. Hook's still in the lead here. Maybe he'll win a pot today. Kicks it off with a check. I think in Hook's shoes, it's a weird spot, right? Because you get called in two places. I think I would start off with a small bet here pretty frequently. Typically speaking, if you're going to use small sizes, top pair, top kicker is one of your favorite hands to bet. So this makes me not like check here. If I'm going to check an ace, I'd rather check a weaker one. Or I'd rather check a stronger hand, I think, than Ace King. I think Ace King just really likes to bet and start getting some value and knock some hands with equity out of the pot. So don't love this check. I'm sure it's fine three-way to be doing some of the time, though. I think for Peter and Tom, both of them have pretty nice hands to check as well. Try and realize your equity. And of course, you do have some showdown value. So makes sense, and we check through. Turn is the action card, the final 10 in the deck now. We have trips for Peter, trips for Tom, and now Hook decides to bet 1/4 pot. Now I actually don't like betting that much because I don't hate betting, and it is 1/4 pot. And if I was going to bet here, I'd bet small. But I think you want to be more polarized in this situation. I don't think you should be doing much betting in opposition here in general. And if you do bet, it should be a bit more polarized. So I don't mind an occasional bet, but I would really prefer check, I think, here. With not just ace king, but also most of my range. Anyway, Peter now decides to call. Interesting spot for Peter, right? Because he has a really strong hand, but he kind of wants to let Tom in behind, right? If he raises, knocks Tom out if Tom has something that could call. So he's kind of just slow playing it, and I don't mind that decision either. They're both fine to me, I think, from Peter here. Tom now, I think that, so this is a really weird spot for Tom because your hand's very good, right? Like you can definitely call turn, call river, and feel good about it. But if you raise and the stacks start going in, do you feel good about putting in $500,000 here with Jack 10? I would not. I would want to have at least one of the strongest 10s, if not the strongest 10, but preferably a boat. Not all too many boats here when Tom checks back the flop. So, within his hands he can have, this is a very good one. So I don't mind a raise. I think raising occasionally is okay. But I would really start to prefer calling with some of my weaker 10s. And when I have a spade in my hand like Tom has here, it's less likely my opponents have some kind of draw that I need to get value from. So it is a very small bet. I don't mind raise, but I would probably look to mainly call this 10 specifically and raise with a bit of my stronger 10s and then work in some flush draw bluffs as well. Anyway, I wouldn't also mind raising, looking to barrel with hands like King, Queen of Hearts, where you block King 10 of Hearts and Queen 10 of Hearts, and you also unblock some of the flush draws. Anyway, okay, so Tom does decide to raise here, which again, not a bad decision. I just think we're starting to get kind of thin. And he decides to make it 73,000 here on the turn. Now Hook decides to call here. I really dislike this from Hook. You have to beat players in both situations. Peter can be trapping a 10. Tom can definitely have a 10. I just think this is a fold, and this is about as bad as you're going to bet for value anyway, and your three-way, so I really don't like this call from Hook. But maybe he just thinks Tom's getting out of line, and maybe both players think Peter would raise a 10. I think that would be a bad read on Peter. I don't think that he's the kind of player that would always raise a 10, but regardless, Hook does decide to call. Now for Peter, the hand's just getting so weird, guys. We're just so far off the rails. I mean, I mainly play heads up. This hand has had so many streets with three people, and everyone's in the same kind of blender position. But now Peter kind of in the spot that Tom was in before, where his hand's good, better. But if all of the money goes in, how do you feel with Queen 10? I'd feel okay. If I had King 10, I'd feel great because you're kind of beating the value range that Tom's repping. But Tom shouldn't be raising weak 10s all that often. And then Tom has to put in the rest of the chips. So I guess where I'm going with it, with this Queen 10, I'd probably prefer call. Hook can still have boats, guys, or better 10 himself. I think I would just call here in Peter's shoes, and let's kind of evaluate on some rivers. But I'm not Peter, mainly because I don't own any kind of shirt that's that color. Oh shit, other than this one? No, it's a little bit different. It's more of like a pastel-y kind of light blue, a little sky blue. Sky blue is darker blue. Anyway, I'm rambling. Okay, so Peter ultimately does decide to raise. And he makes it a pretty confusing size. He makes it 223,000, so a big raise. Now for Tom, he's got to decide, do I want to go with Jack 10 here? I think I would fold, guys. I think I would fold. Not to be nitty-dug for a moment, but Hook can have boats and be trapping. Hook can also have a better 10. Peter can have a better 10. Peter could have been trapping. and you have one of your worst tens. I think I'm letting this one go. But anyway, Tom Dwan, maybe he has some history with Peter. Maybe he really knows how he plays. He's got maybe some reads. I don't know. Tom does not agree, and ultimately he ships it in. Hook finally folds. And now Peter does something that is a little confusing. He decides he's just not sure where he's at. And I think if you're going to be raising this onto the turn this big, you have to have a clear game plan for the jam. It's only 220k more. Tom probably thought he was good at points in this tank because it's 220k more into what will be over $1 million pot. I don't know why Peter decided to take his time here, but he does ultimately make the right decision, and we're off to the races for $1 million. Peter hits both runs, stacking Tom Dwan, and Tom reloads for 500k. I know what you're thinking. Man, I've not seen Texas Mike play a hand in minutes. Well, guess what? You're getting some more Texas Mike. Hands limps in under the gun with queens. He's playing a limp strategy here under the gun. Action Dan raises to 7x with ace queen suited. Seems a bit big to me. Might want to go a little bit smaller than this. Steve calls queen 10. Probably fold versus the 7x. And now Texas Mike looks down at big slick suited on the button. Huge spot now for Texas Mike. This is what gets you paid. He decides we're taking it upstairs, 32,000. This actually looks like a pretty good size 3-bet in my mind. Back to hands. Very awkward. I'm not even going to pretend to understand limp re-raise spots, but certainly would make sense to use queens sometimes. I don't hate calling, but maybe hands is going to play his whole range out of 4-bet, which would make sense too given the price. So he makes it 95,000. They are playing an effective $1.2 million. Now, Action Dan, really brutal situation that's developed here. Players are probably going to think you have much weaker than ace queen suited when you isolate this under the gun limp, but regardless, it's just too much action for ace queen suited. Gets out of the way. Back over to Texas Mike, sizes up his opponent, and puts it all in. Boom, 1.2 million. Covers hands, who has roughly 1.185 million. Wow, what a jam. I would probably mainly just call here in Texas Mike's shoes. I wouldn't mind occasionally 5-betting. If I did, I'd go small 5-bet. But I would mainly call. I'm playing position here on the button, super deep. The way this spot's going to play out is when hands does decide to call, he's going to oftentimes have aces and kings, or mainly only. And then when he folds, you either have him beat or maybe you're flipping. So it's, if you know he has queens, this is a great play, but you don't know he has queens, I think. But anyway, Texas Mike came to play. What will hands do? This is just like classic hands, guys. I feel like so many times hands just has pocket queens and someone's just ripping it in. Or tens. There are a lot of hands. Anyway, ultimately, after a long think, this one gets through, and Texas Mike is pillaging the $1 million game. Session results here at the end. We can see Peter is on a gigantic stack, 2.5 million. Texas Mike on 1.5. These VPIPs, man, we got a lot of people playing some hands, ironically, other than hands. Very high VPIPs across the board. We had some very, very loose play. We had some epic bluffs. We had, this was a great day. And I think it's important to take a moment to appreciate when we do get a really great game that lives up to the billing, where we just have all these incredible hands and action from all of the players. I think that they really put on quite a show. And, this is a lot of money, guys. This is real money that they're playing for. And Texas Mike played 69% VPIP. It's something else. PFR is really where you see him shine. He raised almost half of all hands somehow. That is nuts. There are 7 people, or there were 6 for a while. There's a lot of people at this table. And he just put on one hell of a performance here. Ultimately winning $500,000. Peter, the big winner, up 1.5 million. pretty incredible. Hands won a couple $100K. Everyone else ended down. Tom Dwan down just about $1 million. Action Dan and Hook, the other big losers, and then Steve posting a few $100,000 loss. So that's going to be it for the review. Hey guys, let me know in the comments below, did you enjoy this format or not? I might go back to individual hand review. If you like the session review, let me know that too. And then also, remember, code Don't Punt to up your game using Lucid GTO Trainer. Head over now. Practice how to play versus a computer so when you're at the tables, you know what to do. It's only going to be getting better and better and better. Mobile should be coming out, I believe, a little bit later this year. So stay tuned for that, and definitely continue to work on your game over at upswingpoker.com. And one last thing, I have a big announcement I'm going to be making on stream today. It should be a fun one. I'm excited for this. I'll see you guys there. Peace.